Thank you, Shannon. Well, welcome to everybody. I'm Manas Mahendru, the COO at mHUB. Thank you for joining us in the last installment of our summer speaker series, sponsored by Bank of America. This topic is one that's really close to our mission. It has quickly become the focus of discussions across the United States, really across the world, as we explore some of the fault lines that have been exposed by the pandemic. We believe that the Midwest can and should lead us through and into Industry 4.0. We've gathered this panel today to talk about what that means for our regional economy. So who better to lead this conversation than Ed? We're thrilled to have Ed Zotti as our moderator, formerly with the Chicago Reader, among other city outlets. Ed writes City at a Crossroads for the Chicago Sun-Times, focusing on trends shaping Chicago and the decisions we must make. So I want to thank Ed and throw it over to you to introduce the panel.
Manas, thank you, and welcome to all. I think we're going to have a lively discussion. The format is going to be simple. I'm going to throw out some pertinent questions and ask our panelists to give us their take. But before I do that, I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves, starting in alphabetical order with Chandra Brown.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to mHUB and Ed for hosting this. My name is Chandra Brown. I am the CEO of MxD, which stands for Manufacturing Times Digital. We are the National Manufacturing Innovation Institute, headquartered right here in Chicago on Goose Island. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Chandra. Next, Michael Negron.
Afternoon, everybody. Michael Negron. I'm the Assistant Director for the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. It is the state agency responsible for a variety of economic development tools, ranging from tax credits to grant programs to capital dollars under the governor's Rebuild Illinois program. I'm happy to be here to talk on this topic and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Michael. Terri Rinella. Terri, you're on mute. We'll come back to Terri and go to Thierry Van Landegem.
Hi, all. This is Thierry. Glad to be here. I'm the Executive Director of the Accelerator at mHUB. mHUB is a innovation ecosystem that is focused on hardware, hard tech product development.
Thank you, Terri. And Terri, if you can take yourself off mute, Terri Rinella, and introduce yourself. Well, we will hopefully, Terri will take herself off mute soon. She's had 19 years of experience with Accenture in the mobile technology and IoT space. She helps clients create new value through smart connected products and services, and is currently the market curator at the Chicago Forge, where Accenture industry XO teams bring client innovation to life. And so with that, let's start our panel discussion. I'm going to direct this first question to Chandra. The title of this discussion is Industry 4.0, a reference to the fourth industrial revolution, which probably means a lot to some of you, and to others, I, for one, when I first began writing about this field, will have no idea what it means. So I'd like to ask Chandra to define it, what Industry 4.0 and the fourth industrial revolution mean to her, and then pointedly ask, is it really a thing? Or is it just the buzzword? Is it just something we hope is going to happen someday? So take it away, Chandra.
Thank you, Ed. And boy, I don't often get to do definitions, so I'm pretty excited. If I get to define the fourth industrial revolution, I might make up something really good. But basically, it's a big word that's a big tent. And guess what? It incorporates a whole bunch of things, everything from interconnectivity, automation, machine learning, AR, virtual reality, augmented reality, real-time data, right? All that is incorporated in this term, the fourth industrial revolution. And it really is a revolution. The reality is, You've seen the previous revolutions that have happened, everything from the industry, the cotton gin, customization moving forward. It's really incredible that we are at such a time with so much change that literally we need to call this a revolution. That being said, I would like you to know that I looked up the first time this term had really been used, and it was about 10 years ago. So this has been a long-going revolution. And really, it's only getting, I would say, the attention it deserves now. And we could partially, I know we're going to talk about the pandemic. That's part of what's happened. But let me talk about, is it something we hope will happen? You know, what is it? The reality is, we better hope it's going to happen. And you better hope that you're participating in this revolution. Because the people that aren't in the revolution, I hate to say this, are the ones that are left behind. So this word, the fourth industrial revolution, like I said, it's a big tent. There's lots of stuff under it. But the most important thing to know is it really is about the global competitiveness. This is part of what's going to decide who wins and who loses going forward in the manufacturing community. So personally, I have huge hope that people are going to really pay attention to this and let us help you figure out how best to use this so you get on the digital journey, you get on this revolution in order for your company to succeed in just a sea of global change happening at a really incredible pace.
Thank you, Chandra. I'd like to ask our other panelists to jump in and first say, do you agree with the definition that Chandra gave? But also, I think even more pertinently, do you think this is really happening, or is this just hype?
Yeah, Ed, Thierry here. I want to jump in and repeat one thing that Chandra mentioned. She heard about the name 10 years ago, and yet we are here and still talking about it. I think one of the things we are seeing is that manufacturing industry is a very conservative industry, right? And that's one of the challenges. There are some projects here and there in order to introduce that industry 4.0 in terms of, you know, Internet of Things or some data analytics. It's happening, but at a small scale, especially in the small to medium manufacturing part, it is very slow. And projects typically don't scale large. So, and that in contrast to some of the bigger players who have all the cards in the hands and have the opportunity to introduce these technologies. So we see some differences depending on the sizes of the players itself. So I think here is a huge opportunity in order to build in the region that ecosystem, which is not only these industrial players, but also these startups that are working on these new digital technologies. And by marrying them together, by having them working together, I think we can accelerate. And I think from that perspective, and we will discuss it later on in more detail, we are in a great spot in the Midwest region.
So you think it's more than hype, it's just not emerged as of this point, but it's getting there. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay, anybody else want to jump in? Michael, Terri, either of you. Terri, I wanted to ask you, and you're still on mute, so if you can unmute yourself. Some of the terms that we hear, in addition to Fourth Industrial Revolution and Industry 4.0, terms like digital manufacturing, hard tech. Do all those things mean the same thing? Because they get thrown around a lot. And if not, what are the differences? Terri, I'd like to turn to you, and you are still on mute. So if you can unmute yourself, that would be great. I don't know if Terri is hearing me or not. Does anybody else want to jump in on that topic and hold forth? Do all those terms, hard tech, we hear that one, digital manufacturing, are they all synonyms, or are there subtle differences between them? And if so, what are they?
Well, I can take that one as well, and hopefully Terri can join us soon because she sees not only muted but also in a still image. So there are different terms, and they all sound somewhat similar. But I would like to repeat Chandra's term. It's Industry 4.0 is the tent, and in that tent you have different elements, components. And yes, when you start using digital technologies in a manufacturing environment, you can call it intelligent manufacturing or call it smart manufacturing. So you start automate certain aspects. So that's one thing. We also talk about hard tech. And I think hard tech, I like the term, by the way, because it reminds me of the high tech. When people talk about high tech, they immediately think about Silicon Valley, about software, all the startups and the like. Here, hard tech means it is a hardware component, but it also has probably some software associated to it, maybe some services associated to it. So therefore, we call it hard tech, like in similar fashion as high tech or fintech in the financial sector. So I think we should all start using more and more that term hard tech. Now, hard tech is again one of the components that is being used in smart manufacturing, in intelligent manufacturing, under that broader Industry 4.0 umbrella. And I guess you have many more terms which we could talk about, but given the time we are, we better proceed to maybe to the next part.
All right, thank you, Thierry. Here's a question I want to put that you referred to, but I want to throw it to Michael because he's been sitting there pondering. It's about the tech ecosystem. The distinction is sometimes drawn between hard tech on the one hand and soft tech on the other. Soft tech, I think it is generally understood, primarily involves software, whereas hard tech is a marriage of software and hardware. Soft tech clearly benefits from having a well-developed ecosystem with low cost of entry. In hard tech, in contrast, the ecosystem such as it is much more expensive to get involved with. You've got to deal with machines. You've got to deal with extent. And I think to what extent is a hardware ecosystem emerging? What will it look like? And what barriers remain? And then we'll go from there specifically to do we see it emerging here in Chicago? So Michael, I'll start with you.
Sure. And so I just want to note a couple of things, and I think the others on this panel will be able to speak with sort of more expertise on the specific types of innovations being looked at and under development. But I think from an economic development policymaker perspective, I think there are the makings of both hard tech and soft tech ecosystems here. From our perspective, it is hard to create something out of whole cloth. And so when we at the state level and prior to this, I spent some time under the tenure of the previous mayor. Part of what you focus on doing is if we see potential for growth in a particular sector. In the case of hard tech, some of the foundations have been here, right? We have for example, the battery work happening at Argonne and some of the fundamentals of a skilled workforce and being at the center of national infrastructure, the diverse corporate sector that's here. There are some fundamental components of strength in this sector. And you need that before you can actually decide, well, we want to have a strong hard tech sector. We want to have a strong soft. The fundamentals have to be there. And as policymakers, our job is to work with stakeholders across the board to identify those opportunities and then bring different tools to bear, whether it's policy tools like new incentives or regulatory tools or just flat out making investments, whether it's investments in infrastructure, investments in education, to try and then leverage those strengths and build upon them. And the example that I think of, particularly within that sort of straddles hard tech and advanced digital manufacturing, is the project that in part brings us Chandra, which was an effort that began earlier in the decade. The previous Mayor Emanuel, working with the governor, working with a host of stakeholders across the region, had identified as an opportunity the Obama administration's DMDI grant. And it wasn't enough just to fill out an application and submit it. I mean, the work that went into it was work that in some senses, or in many senses, had started with the development of the 10-year economic plan when the mayor came into office and he repurposed World Business Chicago to create a strategy that started with, okay, what are we good at? Where do we think we can make a leap? Let's focus on those sectors where there are high-paying jobs, where there's real opportunity for growth. And in identifying strengths in manufacturing, those connections helped stakeholders working on this project to bring together. We sought a $70 million grant. We had commitments north of $250 million from different corporate stakeholders. We had university partners, and it was that effort that more than simply a government agency or a private sector actor deciding, well, we're going to do this. It took a lot of work across public and private to develop that plan. We ultimately won the grant, went to UI Labs, and nearly a decade later, we have a tremendous work being done by MxD, a renewal of an agreement with the DoD, so that we know that work is continuing forward, and we hope that will enable us to be competitive in hard tech, in digital manufacturing. But from a policymaker's perspective, you don't start by saying, well, let me put 100 million into something and see if I can make it good. You have to look at sort of where you are situated, look at your strengths and your weaknesses, and then decide through a collaborative process with a host of other voices, where do we want to make strategic investments so that we can be well positioned from a competitive perspective in sectors that can bring growth and prosperity to the constituents that we serve.
Let me press on one point. There are some big investments, there are some big assets out there. But one of the things about soft tech is that the classic case, you can do this in your garage. You've got a computer, you can code something overnight. It's a lot tougher with hard tech, just the nature of it. You've got to hook up to machinery, to things, to equipment, some of which is not cheap at all. Some of which is getting less expensive. The classic 3D printer thing has opened up a lot of opportunity for a lot of people, but it's still got a long ways to go. Is it realistic to expect the kind of robust ecosystem that we see in software to emerge in the hard tech side of things? And are we getting any closer to that? It's never going to get quite as easy, but can it get easier? And what sorts of things do we need to see to make that possible? Anybody want to jump in? Terry, I see you're back here online. Do you want to take that on, or do you want to wait a minute? Terry, you're hearing us. You're on mute. All right, let's...
I'm happy to take it.
Okay.
And thank you, Michael, for what you said. One, I'd like to give credit, to the Chicago area. It's incredible what is happening. And again, I don't think sometimes we're so modest. We're like the city of broad shoulders, and we don't talk about as much what's really happening in this scene, from mHUB to what our community colleges. We have some of the best universities, the infrastructure here. It's really an amazing city. I was born on the south side, so I'm a little biased, but I've lived on both coasts for many years. And there really is something unique about Chicago. What I would tell you, though, this hard versus soft, that's a great question, Ed. But the reality is it's so combined, and I'm seeing huge progress, including in terms of affordability. And it's one of the great things about mHUB and the maker spaces and what's being done in the entrepreneur community on how you can do things more cost effectively. At our facility at MxD, we have this future factory, right, where we're demonstrating, we're trying to make digital come alive. And a lot of it's for small and medium-sized manufacturers. It costs, I can give you a sensor retrofit kit today that costs $300 that'll make your legacy equipment from the 1940s that are still being used in manufacturers all over this country. And we can make it digital, tell you if it's on or it's off. Is it overheating for like a few $100s? That's the incredible thing. Sensors and hard tech have become so much cheaper. It's why data is happening so fast and you're able to gather so much. So I think the key is you need to have these ecosystems to show people what your return on investment is, and that it's not necessarily so daunting and so hard in the hard tech space. You can come visit mHUB, you can come visit MxD, like we'll show you low cost solutions that honestly, the small manufacturers, the medium manufacturers, the big folks already know this. We have, Deere is a member in Boeing and Caterpillar. I think they got this down. But what we really need to do is help the whole supply chain realize that this actually is affordable. This world is not going to be based just on software. We all know that. And if the pandemic hasn't taught us anything about supply chain and how much you care about paper products and toilet paper right now, nothing else will. That's why I think it is a great time of we can make a much bigger impact.
Chandra, thank you.
And Ed, maybe I can follow up on Chandra's point, because there is one thing, which is the reuse and using new technologies within the broader manufacturing space, as we have both pointed out. But there is also the drive towards building new business models with new hard tech component, right? And as you pointed out, making hard tech is time consuming. It is also very capital intensive. And what we have seen in a lot of cases is that startups in the hard tech environment are really struggling to find the right place in order just to prototype their stuff. And that's where mHUB, as one example, has done a great job in the last 3 years or so in attracting more than 300 hard tech startups, building their first prototypes and first products. They launched more than 1,000 new products. And that's where we can help by building that ecosystem, not only attracting the hard tech startups, but also having them work and live almost together with industrial partners, because that's what Chicago and the Midwest can also bring, is that legacy of industrial players. So if we bring those two together, I think we have taken a big step. And then the third component to it is the investment part, right? It's like, who is going to fund all of that? If we can also make sure that there is sufficient investment dollars for these startups, then I think we have a great ecosystem. And that's exactly what these different partners around the table are doing today.
Thank you, Thierry. I'm going to try and be a devil's advocate here. And again, I'm going to try and get Thierry involved with this. I know you've had some technical difficulties. If you can take yourself off mute, if this is a question you want to deal with, take it away. If not, we can come back to you. But the pushback to what, we're all in Chicago. We think Chicago is a great town, but has the ship already sailed? For example, clearly one of the backbones of Midwestern industry historically was the automotive industry. Well, now Elon Musk is out in California building electric cars. Aren't those guys way ahead? Is it realistic for us, to be blunt, to hope to catch up with a guy like that, people like that, his company out there in California on this cutting edge technology? Terri, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Ed, and thank you to the audience for your patience in my finally getting here only 20 minutes into the call. This is going to go down as my the COVID mistake here in terms of connectivity. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. So I don't think the ship has sailed. I still believe there's a home in Chicago for hard tech, and in the Midwest. I think everybody had some really nice thoughts about how this is all coming together. And I think from our perspective, when we think about hard tech and we think about software and hardware coming together, it's always about fusing the teams. It's about how do you break down the barriers and the silos of those different skill sets. And I think our ability in Chicago, in the Midwest, for us to be able to start bringing those capabilities together, the cross-skilling of our people, what we're finding is that our hardware engineers who went to school for engineering, married with our software developers who went to school straight for engineering, they are starting to cross-pollinate. And I think that cross-pollination is something that's going to be really important and an important skill set. And I think that can happen in Chicago. It's not just a West Coast thing. It's a Middle Coast thing as well.
Great. Glad you finally joined us here.
Just add one.
Does anyone else want to jump in with some comments along those lines?
Can you guys hear me? If I can add just one note, just specifically on electric vehicles, Elon Musk is making electric vehicles on the West Coast. We have Rivian here in Normal, Illinois, making electric vehicles. I know the question was about Chicago, but we also need to look at this from both a regional and a statewide perspective. And Rivian is starting their operations. They've received an order for 100,000 electric vehicle vans from Amazon. They have a $2.5 billion investment. Companies want and need to be closer to their suppliers. And here in the Midwest, we are really at the center of everything. And one of the, I mentioned Argonne earlier, one of the differentiators that we have is the Joint Center for Energy Storage Research at Argonne, which can play a significant role in developing that competitive advantage for this type of work. Not just nationally, but here in Illinois. So we shouldn't forget that there is still important work, just specifically on electric vehicles. But There is important manufacturing work happening here. It's 13% of the state economy. It's 10% of our workforce. There is still manufacturing going on in Illinois, and Chicago is a part of it. Maybe it's not all going to be in Chicago, but Chicago, particularly with its corporate sector and its startup and innovation ecosystem, will be an important part of what is a state and a regional manufacturing ecosystem.
I want to chime in here, Ed, if I could, because I think this is a really important question. Let's be clear. There is no way it has bypassed Chicago. And I mean, if anything, the United States, either as a whole, look at it. We still have almost 2.4 million manufacturing jobs that are going to be unfulfilled through 2028. I could start talking to you. We're the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. You want to know how little is being done with cybersecurity, the protection of all this data and Industry 4.0? I would tell you 95%, we have over 300 members all over the country, the majority, I would say, in the Midwest. But the reality is so many of these small businesses have even made step one on their digital journey, right, to get there. So there is so much work to be done. There is so many manufacturing jobs. We did a guide. We did a very, we were like, we have to figure out what are we missing. We did a digital kind of cyber guide to talk about what are the jobs of the future. They talk about, the World Economic Forum says a huge percent of jobs now haven't even been created that our current grade schoolers are going to get to. So I just think there's so much. You think about digital ethicists, like that's one of the jobs we do, all these cyber jobs. Like I guarantee you, like nobody's won the digital ethicist workforce pipeline yet, in the United States. So I would argue it's the United States to lose, and then specific hubs like Chicago that need to do the great work that's being done from our Department of Commerce and others in investing in these strategic areas in order to win. But the battle is not over. I can't tell you, like, half of what we do is just increasing awareness. That's why I get on webinars like this, because I want to tell people there's resources out there. There's so much that needs to be done. Chicago is not lost.
Thank you, Chandra. Thierry, you look like you had something to say.
Yeah, I was just nodding in full agreement. But there is one step more, which is you can have a great ecosystem with all these different stakeholders, like we mentioned, like the corporates, like the startups, like the research centers, like the government chiming in and so forth. I think the essential thing we need is to have them all work together towards that same end goal, towards that same end vision. And that's something that I don't always see happening. There is too many fragmented activities in different silos. So bringing all these together will definitely help in order to bring us even on the forefront of this initiative.
I want to raise a question that Chandra brings to mind here. Workforce. I mean, let's face it. If you're a software developer, that's a pretty cool job. Might be a little geeky in some way, but that's a cool thing nowadays. Manufacturing, let's face it, that's pretty old school. It sounds like the mills. It sounds like the 1950s. Yeah, and I know it's a different world, but does the world as a whole know? Does anybody grow up wanting to work in manufacturing these days? I don't know. Anybody want to tackle that? How do you get the workforce involved here?
Yeah, I'll take that, Ed. I don't think we're there yet. I don't necessarily think that manufacturing is seen as the sexy new job. It's not necessarily on the top of people's lists yet. But I think because of this convergence that we're having between software and hardware, because of this industrial revolution that we're having, we're starting to see that shift. And I'm seeing it in the people who are coming into our organization, people coming in as software developers and seeing like, hey, this is where the next big things are happening, is in the manufacturing space. But I don't think it's not pervasive yet. And I think some of the things that we need to do is exactly the kind of thing that Chandra is talking about, is getting the word out there. How do we make manufacturing in that kind of career, in that direction to go, very, very inviting. And some of the things that, we see in helping to spur that on is just some of the underlying technologies. While technology is not, shouldn't be the lead on it, that's where people get excited. People get excited about bringing AR and VR technology into the workspace. If you think of kids who are in high school, kids who are in college coming out, sometimes you do need to look a little bit at the shiny object to get people excited, but then to understand really kind of what is the end benefit and what is the value in the end. Sometimes you got to start with the shiny object before you get to the underlying things behind it. So I think we have a ways to go, but I think it still is in a promising spot right now.
If I could chime in, so I agree with Terri, and I think another shiny object for purposes of communicating to potential workers is the wages, right? And it is a career path where you can make more money considering the education level than other areas. But from a policymaker perspective, a key part of that is then making those changes to that education pipeline to accommodate the fact that getting into manufacturing, particularly some of the growth sectors, it requires additional training beyond high school, requires specialty training. And so moving particularly our community colleges towards a lifelong learning model where you have stackable credentials and this concept where someone's getting a credential, going to work, a couple years later, coming back out, getting another credential, going back in, or even just doing it while they're working, making sure that our community colleges are aligned along that structure. And both in my current role and in my previous role, this is something that both of the elected officials I've worked for have adopted as central to their education visions. With Mayor Emanuel, it's this concept of turning the city colleges of Chicago, each one of them, into a center of excellence, and having corporate partners help co-design curricula, making an $80 million capital investment at Richard J. Daley in partnership with the state to do advanced manufacturing facilities there. And then at the state level, applying these same concepts. And then as part of our Rebuild Illinois, the governor's bipartisan capital plan, we have funds to do something similar downstate, where we would build advanced manufacturing training facilities, 2 of them outside of the Chicago area. And that's a program that our department is putting together, and we're actually going to release a competitive process on that in the coming months. And so the training and the workforce, yes, we have to do a better job of communicating. We have to show people these are cool jobs, you're building cool things, and you can make more money, but then also making sure the pathways in to this field is adaptable to where people are. And that means stackable credentials, it means partnerships with corporations, it means having the most modern training facilities available so that folks can get into these fields.
Michael, thank you. I'd like to turn to a different topic, kind of a topical topic, the impact of the pandemic on advanced manufacturing, on hard tech. What kind of impact has it had? There's kind of a two-parter. One is just general things that have changed, because of the need to social distance and so forth. And the other thing is the revelation, I would have to say, in light of the difficulty of getting supply chain difficulties. The most basic kinds of products come from far overseas, from countries that sometimes are our friends and sometimes they're not, but in any case, they're pretty far away. And whether that's going to have an impact one way or another to push people to want to develop manufacturing of any kind in this country, to sort of reshore our manufacturing base, and in particular, to make use of advanced manufacturing techniques. Who wants to jump in on that? I'll open it up. Chandra, how about you?
Okay, I think you had 5 questions in there, but I will try to take the first one. Okay, why don't we just talk about the pandemic? Like, if anything, the pandemic, for the supply chain, for security issues, has highlighted the importance of that. And now even the regular folks, the mom and dads who worry about where they got their toilet paper, now you talk about vaccines. Who's making the vaccines? Who's doing the glass vials? Where do you have the supply chain? These are life and death issues and some day-to-day issues that I think it has really changed how people think about, the Industrial Revolution and what's happening. I would tell you, in terms of MxD, because we're your membership organization, we have hundreds of members all over the country. Yeah, it's some very rough times, for manufacturers. So I want to acknowledge that the pandemic, obviously lots of companies will be going out of business, just the same as restaurants, just the same as the service industry. That will be hitting manufacturers too. On the other hand, it's uplifted some as well, especially those that are farther along kind of on this digital thread, and it's opening up new opportunities. For us at MxD, we put out over $100 million in 60 projects kind of over the last few years. We've recently got another, over 10 million just in the last few months through the CARES Act and other funding with FDA to help with this supply chain issue. So there's like huge number of folks now. We're working on, for example, a supply chain risk alert using AI and data to try to figure out where are your vulnerabilities in your supply chain, mapping it out. This hasn't been done. It needs to be done. It should have been done before, honestly, but they say never waste a good pandemic. Like maybe we can start to actually do some of this mapping and use these technologies to move things along more so. So I think I touched on supply chain. I think but I think it's been a big change. The pandemic has actually highlighted, in my opinion, the importance of manufacturing, the importance of digital, all this virtual work. I mean, think about it. There's a run right now on cameras and everything all the equipment that we have right now with us, it's out, like you can't get it. There's so many shortages. So some are doing really well and some are hit really hard. And so there's an unfortunate big difference between that and the manufacturing community.
Other panelists.
And I would add to this point, basically saying that indeed the pandemic has probably accelerated the whole transformation, the industry 4.0 on a faster pace than what would have taken place without a pandemic. And I think as an example, companies, manufacturers are keen to introduce some of these technologies in order to apply social distancing rules. Think about some of the technologies such as wearables, Internet of Things, etc., allow you to implement already some use cases where social distancing is important. But think further and more visionary as well. You not only use that technology for social distancing, which is an issue now, but also think further, because that same wearable can also be helpful for workers in manufacturing plants in order to increase safety or help them do less heavy tasks and so forth. So if you take long approach, I think we are on a very good path forward as well.
Right.
Yeah, and I would add on to that just as Thierry's saying, we've been, we keep talking about the pandemic and adjusting to the new normal. Well, we've started calling it the new never normal, because our clients across all industries, retail, manufacturing, especially in distribution, they're coming to us and saying like, okay, we need to react now to things at the beginning of the pandemic that were basically like, how do we sustain our business during this time? And how do we keep our workers safe when they return to work? And part of that, though, is about then mitigating the risk, as you're saying, Terri, for the future and continued disruption. So now the shift has been to what's next, and in that next, we're seeing a lot of things on the safety, continuity in plant operations, but really, what is that reinvention? And an organization starting to think about, okay, it's not just about the same thing that we've been doing. It's how do we reinvent ourselves? How do we take something we've been manufacturing a product for many years? How do we shift that and say, now maybe we need to look at a product as a service, shifting not just as a manufacturer, but someone who has those digital services behind it. And so I think it's a very interesting time. It's like you were saying, a forcing function almost for Industry 4.0 to kind of step up and actually, for those who can do the spend and who have strategically planned for it, this is actually could be a good environment to do it, and certainly provide some competitive advantage going forward.
Yeah, and I would add, sorry, just to pop in and further build on that. I think in the past, what we have seen with Industry 4.0 is almost like, hey, I want to do a project on this new shiny object type of technology. And typically they move on and they implement it on something which is not that impactful, because, we are in a conservative industry, so God knows what will happen. So we try to do it, but then you don't see real value out of that. And that's probably one of the reasons, there are several, but one of the reasons why there is no scalable introduction of these digital technologies. Now, with the pandemic, we have a must-do project. And if we can then increase that towards that vision of, hey, we have now this technology, what new businesses, what new business models can we introduce? Because that also is, I think, one of the key essential opportunities here is rethink the whole manufacturing. Manufacturing was about making this hard thing, boom, fini, stop. Now it's about, with all these new technologies, can we also rethink what we're doing? Maybe we're not selling anymore these hard pieces, but selling a service, which happens to have some hard pieces in there. So there is lots of opportunity. And I think if we build the right platform, we can really bank on that.
Let me pivot from there to a related topic that has to do with workforce to a degree. The pandemic has made it pretty clear that the burdens and the benefits of things like, well, certainly the burdens of the pandemic, but also the benefits of advanced technology fall unevenly on the people out there. There are people who have been much more heavily burdened by the pandemic than others, people of color, and who have benefited less than others for the same token on the upside. Who benefits from the emergence of these new technologies, and who benefits the least? And what can we do about that to equalize things? Michael, maybe you want to start with that? It sounds like your kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we've seen in just across the board, sort of the larger, more established actors have been more positioned to quickly pivot to this new environment, partly because of access to resources and as well as the existing relationships. And I think that's been a challenge with respect to manufacturing. Just before this, I was looking at a study from a couple of years ago as to which types of manufacturers had adopted sort of these Internet of Things type technologies to their production lines, and there was a large distinction between large companies and small companies. And I think what we're observing in the current climate is that I think that's continuing. Larger players are more positioned to move quickly. Smaller players can struggle, don't have as much capacity. And I think from a policymaker perspective, we'll use the tools that we have, but I think from had the federal government adopted a more strategic role in the early months of this pandemic, when it was clear that we didn't have sufficient PPE and other equipment, and made more, let's say, assertive and thoughtful use of, say, the Defense Production Act, more work could have been done not only to ramp up production and more strategically reshore some of these lines, but there could have been an equity lens towards, or at least a company size equity lenses towards who is engaged in this type of production. But instead, it's kind of happening on an ad hoc basis. And so we worked with the Illinois manufacturers to do an initiative to get companies within the state to commit to adjusting production lines to support the development of medical equipment. Famously on social media, we all read about all these different distillers who were switching from making bourbon and whiskey to making a hand sanitizer. And then we'd be asked on the back end of that to try to facilitate some transactions so that these products were then sold at a lower cost to public health actors who needed it. So there are things that can be done, but I do think that we would be in a better spot if there was a more aggressive and strategic effort at the federal level, because I think that's where really you can level the playing field here by combining both authority and resources, which can happen more readily at the national level.
We are pretty much close to the end of our time. I don't know if I have room for one more question or not. I'm sure Shannon will give me the hook if not. But that question is, what's in the cards for the city of Chicago specifically? And I'm talking about within the city limits. As in 1948, we were the major heavy center of heavy industry in the world. And we are not today. We are still a major industrial power, but we have long since ceased to be the premier player in the world. What are the chances of the city again becoming a manufacturing powerhouse? And if they're slim, which I personally suspect they are, what role realistically can the city aspire to play? In particular, the workforce. of the city of Chicago? What role can they aspire to play? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I can start. I can. So if you focus narrowly on the city, look, I think you're unlikely in Chicago and really in any other major global American city to see a return to the sort of large-scale manufacturing that typified the city of the mid to early 20th century. The direction and where land use is going and how people live and how people work, the character of cities are changing. And I think one example, sort of a wonky example, but I think it has very visible manifestation, is the approach to planned manufacturing districts over the terms of the last three mayors of the city of Chicago, from Daley to Rahm to Lori Lightfoot. Planned manufacturing districts are these zoning districts that were intended to keep manufacturing here. So easier to do large-scale manufacturing, couldn't do residential, designed in proximity to important assets like highways and rivers. The tumult over Lincoln Yards, what isn't discussed is that this was one of the sort of crown jewel planned manufacturing districts over the last several decades. And there was a recognition over the course of multiple mayors that the highest use of that land, despite its proximity, again, to the Chicago River, to the highway, was no longer manufacturing, was no longer the production of goods that can then be transported down the river, down the highways, but was instead conversion into residential and recreational use in line with what's happening across the rest of the north side of the city. And as cities like Chicago are increasingly becoming places for knowledge workers, for empty nesters, where people go for recreational activity, people go to work in sort of professional type jobs, universities or sectors like that, that kind of manufacturing, steel mills, car production, like what we associate with manufacturing, like how the kind of job that my dad had. He was a UAW, he used to build engines for Navistar. Decreasingly in the city, right? I think still in the region, as I said earlier in this conversation, that I think as we looked towards, if we look towards a more regional perspective, I think Chicago can be the headquarters, the center of it, where the innovation happens, where the soft tech components happen, where the workforce development happens. I think Chicago can be the center of a manufacturing ecosystem that stretches across the region, the northeast region of the state, and it's incumbent on the stakeholders that are part of this conversation, elected officials, other policymakers, other leaders, to take the collaborative efforts that is necessary, both organizing in the private side, the efforts of organizations like mHUB, to making sure that the state is investing, the state and the city and the federal government are investing in infrastructure, we're investing in education, we're changing incentives and different policies to encourage this type of development. So I think Chicago will be very relevant to manufacturing. Do I think it will be home to a host of factories spitting out large vehicles and large other types of products and that are shipping out via truck and on river barge? I don't think that's where the city is going anymore. I frankly don't think that's where any of the major global cities in the U.S. are going. But I think there's still a very important role for Chicago to play, and I think you'll find widespread agreement amongst leaders in the region and the state on this possibility.
Go ahead, Mike. Yeah. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, sorry, Ed. I want to add on to Mike. I think the role that ecosystems and initiatives and incubators like mHUB and others are playing within the city is really one where you see a breadboard of new activity, right? We attract startups, which are a few people, a small team, but which we connect with the whole ecosystem we were discussing before, with industrial parties as well as with investors and so forth. So you're attracting people from not only the city, not only the region, but hopefully from the nation. That's what we are trying to do when we will launch tomorrow the Accelerator at mHUB. It's attract people, knowledge people from the nation towards the city, where they can then start building that new business, right? And if we can succeed in that, we are building a talent pool, and we can keep them within the city for some time, when they are starting up and slightly scaling up, but once they are too big, maybe they will go to the suburbs or broader region. And I think one of the roles that mHUB is doing and other similar incubators or company builders is exactly right, trying to attract that talent, build a new business, and hopefully keep them here in the region.
One last question, and Shannon, if you're going to shut me up, I'll shut up. But if not, I'll tell you one last shot. And I want to push back a little bit here. One of the things you've been hearing now for years, not necessarily always in the manufacturing context, but it's what we're talking about now, is we need to get more jobs in the communities as distinct from downtown. We need to build, and people are clearly thinking somewhat nostalgically about the days of the steel mills and the days of the stockyards, which clearly are gone. Is that a completely unrealistic hope to get jobs in the neighborhoods, quote unquote, whatever that means? And does anything about the direction that manufacturing is heading today suggesting we're going to get there? Or is it going to be downtown, or is it going to be out in the suburbs? Are there going to be jobs for people that disadvantage people who can't get jobs now in the city, in the neighborhoods like there used to be back in the old days, or are they going to have to go someplace? How do you see that playing out? Anybody want to take a shot?
Yeah, maybe I'll just comment. I think that one thing that we've learned from the pandemic is that we've been able to move a lot of our jobs to be working from home. Now, that certainly does not include manufacturing specific jobs where you need to be on site. However, I think we've seen a lot of examples in other industries that could, along with enabling manufacturing, digital manufacturing in certain ways, that allow certain pieces to be done more and more so remotely. So for instance, using AR, VR technologies and enabling that remote worker, more and more individuals they may not have to be in front of a machine. They can be an over-the-shoulder coach for someone else. So instead of having 10 people who need to be on site, can you help to reduce the number of people who can be on site? So those individuals could still be working, let's say, in those neighborhoods. They're working from a different location. And I think it kind of flips maybe your question on its head a little bit, but in a different way of thinking of, hey, what has this work from home learnings brought to us across different industries? And that may be one way to look at it, is we might be able to start shifting to have more local kind of organizations in the neighborhoods, in the suburbs, in the city, because of this paradigm shift that we've had over the past couple months.
All right.
I would also like to add in here, if I could, Ed, I think I think there will be jobs. Obviously, we talk about this in the city of Chicago, but different jobs. And one of the things we haven't touched on here is mass customization and what's happening with additive manufacturing, right? There's food being made directly in the restaurants. You're customizing what you're doing. It may not be the long assembly lines of building a car with all the robots that you've seen before, but there's a ton of work that needs to be done with that, and so much more about kind of the local supply chain. And it may be different pieces. It's not going to be the vision exactly that you said before and that Michael was talking about, but I think there is a lot of hope. And when I look at all the things, manufacturing is still the number one path to the middle class. Like that is a fact. It's one of the ways you can do it versus the service industry. But when I look at all the upskilling we need to do in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of digital training, again, we are suffering from some huge pipeline issues in manufacturing. So it's not that there is not a need for workers. And I do want to do one shout out. There still is, a lot of welders and fitters and machinists that are needed today. Like it is not that has been fixed. So we can talk about the future too. I'm focused on the cybersecurity, the digital engineers, but the reality is there is a need today for a skilled advanced manufacturing workforce. So I just think it's important not to forget that. And there is great groups like Manufacturing Renaissance Group. There's a lot of training in terms of folks in the underprivileged areas that, we need that workforce. We need to increase our diversity. So I would just end with that.
All right, thank you. All right, Shannon, do we want to take some questions from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you to everybody for that discussion. It's been really great to sit and listen. I want to remind everybody on the line that we're taking questions through the Q&A function, where not only can you ask a question, but you can upvote other questions as we go ahead and round out this last 8 minutes of the panel. So I'll start firing away. A question from Scott, an attendee. Being a native Midwesterner seems like we might be missing part of the point of the fourth industrial revolution. According to the World Economic Forum, there's a significant part of Industry 4.0 that is about how companies working with local communities to address some of the more difficult social issues that we are all facing, and not just about technology and increased manufacturing productivity. The question is, how can the fourth revolution also be used to address social issues?
You want to volunteer? Jump in.
Well, I kind of tease off of what I just said about the path to the middle class and, increasing diversity. And, we talk about income redistribution and greater equality and fairness, particularly in the larger cities. I do think this is one way that you can be using kind of the fourth revolution to help drive, like when I talked about that mass customization and the different skill sets and the upskilling. I think those are some of the social issues. I would also say the use of AI and VR and CR, when I think of things like safety and health, right? Those are going to be huge things that empower. I'll just give you one example. If you digitalize all your workforce instructions, for example, you can do it in any language, right? Instantaneously. So I can have people that don't speak English as a native language immediately kind of going to work and following and training kind of the less privileged and those folks that haven't had the same opportunities to excel as others. So I do believe there are ways, and I think we should be using it in a way to help some of these huge societal issues.
Thank you, Chandra.
Great. Another question from Katie, an attendee. I'm interested to hear the panelists' views of the role that the local private investment culture, types, risk tolerance, etc., plays in the growth of different industries in Illinois. So to build on that, are there some industries that investors are more willing to invest in, and what does that look like as we look to grow different sectors?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in here, Shannon. It is true. If you look at the investment dollars spent in certain industries, there is a huge discrepancy. If I take, for example, two extremes, go and look at the software industry and compare that to the hard tech industry or investments, there is like a factor of 15 to 1. So for every $15 spent in soft-related startups and the like, there is only $1 spent in hard tech. So there is a huge discrepancy. And that's also one of the opportunities here for the Midwest region. And I think mHUB, as an example, launched or announced recently the first closing of its product impact fund, which is exactly focused on that hard tech community. So investment in hard tech startups. That's, I think, one of the opportunities we have in order to show the world, or at least show the nation, hey, we are Chicago, Midwest, we have dollars we want to spend in hard tech.
Great. Thanks, Thierry. You heard it here first. Keep an eye out for the mHUB Accelerator launching very soon. Okay, last question, and I think everybody will have some examples for this one. So I'll put it out to everybody, and I want to assure their attendees, there's a lot of questions still in there, but we're here. So reach out to us at team@mhubchicago.com. We'll connect with panelists to get your questions answered. So just know that if we don't get to it on the line, we'll hit you back later. Okay, maybe one or two examples from each panelist as we end. Can you share some specific examples of manufacturers who are leading the way in Industry 4.0, or the startups who are helping them to do it? Perhaps Terri Bueller, maybe we start with you.
Sure. So yes, I can give a couple examples here. So the manufacturers that we really see leading the way, I'm going to give kind of more of a profile versus naming actual manufacturers, but the things that we are seeing them doing is actually focusing on the value first. I think Terry might have said this earlier. When you start with the shiny object and you start with the technology, that's when you start to get in trouble. And so we've seen the manufacturers who go through the process of understanding what are the clear outcomes that they want to have and what is the business value of doing that implementation or digitizing their manufacturing space, starting with the end in mind and starting with that value. And then looking at the other components around it, the process and specifically the operating model. So again, what we see a lot of times happening is people go straight for the technology. Hey, all the buzzwords you can think of, AR, VR, IoT, edge computing, you bring that all together and let's focus first on the value. And then what is that actual operating model that you need to have in place? Because if you start to think about the convergence of things like IT and OT together, those are completely different departments who are needing to come together to do something that hasn't been done before. And there's lots of those silos that are already in the organization. So I think being able to focus on value, operating model, and process, in addition to technology, is where we're seeing manufacturers be most effective.
Other panelists want to jump in? Some examples of industry?
The only thing I would add to what Terry said, I know it's hard to pick specific examples of, when you're a membership group, and I would say every one of our 300 members are doing incredibly innovative stuff, as an example. So like when I talked about, I can pick on one light guide, a small business that is doing the work instructions, right, and everything that goes around with that. But what I would say, using the general side, it really is about flexibility, agility right now. And I can't emphasize enough those folks that are convening. So think about these manufacturers, like especially competitors, even like big companies. It's like they need to get to the solution faster, right? This is happening so quickly, the speed of change. And so what we've seen is you can always get a solution better, right? If you have 20 diverse people in a room, you're going to get to a better solution quicker than you are with one company or one group in there. That's why this diversity across, these various even job groups and areas is really critical. So I would say we're really seeing the ones that are making the best in terms of this are those that are agile and humble and, able to put together kind of unique groups to get to a solution faster.
Yeah, and let me chime in and of course not name anyone as both my colleague panelists have said. But key for me in every incubation that I've done in the past or building startups and so forth, the key is always to focus on real problems, real pain points. And there are a lot of pain points, right? And when you focus on a pain point, on a problem statement, and you find a solution, you definitely have a winning combination. So I think about one of the startups we also had within mHUB, and I will not name it, but it was very focused on safety of workers within the factory environment. And as a result, they built some technology or used technology in a wearable fashion that operators of machinery could use in order to guard them for safety. And I think that is such an important element moving forward. We see robots everywhere, we see automation and so forth, but the safety of the operators themselves, even if they are helped by robots, is extremely important. So there was a real problem, a real pain point. There was a clear solution, and then you just need the whole recipe of building, starting up, and scaling up that business, and they were very successful and are still successful.
Terri, thank you.
Great. So it looks like we're at the end of our time. So I know everybody's time is precious these days. I just wanted to say one more time to attendees that we are here and we will connect with panelists to get your questions answered. I saw so much good discussion and back and forth through both the chat and the Q&A. It was phenomenal to see how engaged this group was. So keep the conversation going. You can reach us at mhubchicago.com. I want to say thank you to Ed for moderating the panel. Thank you to our panelists for such an engaging discussion. It was a real pleasure to watch. And thank you to Bank of America, our sponsor for the summer series. This wraps it up. This is the last in our discussion. So it's been great to keep this discussion going about Industry 4.0 and manufacturing. If you haven't quite had that hunger about the discussion satisfied, I will say mHUB and MxD are hosting the 4th Revolution Awards to recognize good work in this field. October 13th, we got a pitch night next week for the Rising Star. So if you hadn't had enough yet, come find us. We'll be keeping the conversation going. So thank you to everybody. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for your engagement. Everybody stay safe, and we'll see you on the line.
Thank you.